All right. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this again, Candice. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Hi, my name is Candice Bland. I was a former public school teacher here in New Jersey for 17 years. I taught Spanish in the high school. I then, over the last 2 years, transitioned into administration, educational administration, and I currently serve in the past 2 years as the district supervisor of bilingual education, world languages, and English as a second language grades K through 12th grade.
So you obviously have a lot of experience and a lot on your hands right now. So let's talk a little bit about SmartClass Plus and why you chose to use it in your classroom. You know, did you initiate that process? How did you find it? Just talk a little bit around that.
I started out in my district in the year 2002, 2003, and I was lucky enough to go to a district that had an embedded language lab, a stationary language lab. It was archaic to say the least, but I was still happy. It had cassette tapes, and the students completed these lab reports on their lunch or their study hall, and it really wasn't the best utilization of a language lab. I had just come off of a college at University of Delaware where we had like the state-of-the-art language lab. So after many, many years of me advocating for us to renovate the place, they then tasked me with looking for the software and the hardware that would be the best fit for that language lab. So I put a search out. I went to visit a couple different colleges and I stumbled across Robotel and really, really thought that this was the way that I wanted to go. So it was basically my little Spanish teacher insight and what I thought would be the most user-friendly at the time. We're talking maybe 2010, 2011, not sure the exact date it was, and we installed Robotel into our district, into the language lab. So we did an overhaul of the language lab, updated with computer screens, got rid of all the cassette tapes, and launched the new software. I was the language lab coordinator at the time on top of my teaching responsibilities, and I really just learned the platform inside and out, and then was tasked with also turnkeying it to my peers at the same time. So my students were the guinea pigs. I would made them go in there all the time. We went in once a week, twice a week during class time. And I really just, by trial and error, learned how to use the language lab with the students sitting in front of us and me looking through the manuals and trying my best to complement my instruction. And after about a year of me really getting my feet wet and learning the ropes, it was like I couldn't imagine my teaching without it. It was the biggest compliment that enhanced my instruction. I saw my students just becoming more and more fluent with the different activities that I was able to leverage through the software. And each year as updates happened through Robotel, the program just got better and better and better. My students were becoming more fluent speaking wise. Their listening skills were super heightened. Their grammar was off the scales because I was just able to create the most student-centered, authentic, and aligned with exactly what I was teaching activities that I knew was going to just enhance their language acquisition skills. The platform continued to get better and better. As I started to transition out of the classroom is when Robotel started to talk about this cloud-based app. And I was like, this is amazing because now I can have it in my classroom. Because again, if you have one language lab per 14 teachers, you have to wait your turn. So even though I monopolized the language lab and I often had to give it up because I was in there way too much, but I don't know how you can ever be in the lab too much. I was now able to run parts of the lab in my classroom, and that was really cool as like a station to complement as like a do now or an exit ticket to assess the students. So I was even leveraging it in my classroom. As I transitioned into administration, I decided that I wanted to share the wealth because this was only at the high school. So I then implemented it in the middle school. The middle school teachers took off with it, the ESL teachers. I also started to invite ESL teachers into the language lab before the Let's Talk software came around. And they were a little bit hesitant, but they quickly got with the program because I was able to train them and show them all of the bells and whistles and show them, you know, how to create the activities. And I even launched it K-5, although I feel like grades 3, 4, and 5 is where it really starts to hone in on language skills that students are able to work with. The K-1, 2, it's a little bit funny for them because their hands are so little and they're still trying to figure out, you know, life in general. So I feel like grades 3, 4, and 5, it's really starting to make a change, especially for my English as a second language students. Now this year I had all teachers trained on that teach English as a second language, or my bilingual teachers, on the Let's Talk software. And I'm so just lucky and happy that, you know, there's a treasure trove for teachers to pick from for activities, because one of the things that was a deterrent for some teachers was actually creating their own activities, which for me was the biggest, you know, plus, because I like to do my own thing. But now Let's Talk, I feel, is such an amazing resource. And especially right now with everything that's going on with online learning, teachers have at their fingertips just the best activities to continue language acquisition, especially for those English language learners. So I'm very happy with that Let's Talk software as well. And in general, the product is just, I believe it is a necessity. If a district can implement this, your teacher's instruction will be enhanced tenfold.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, you flew through the questions I was going to ask you, like, you know, like it was your job. Way to go, Candice. But it's easy when you're passionate about something. It's easy.
And when I use it so much and so fluently, like looking back on it, I felt so lucky. I felt so lucky that I was even able to have this resource. And I wanted to make sure that it stayed. And so, you know, foreign languages always are the ugly stepsister in the school district, and they're the ones that are thought of last because of the way that we're a very monolingual society, unfortunately. So I wanted to make this place shine, and I saw a huge change in the AP scores. If used and leveraged adequately, the students are machines. When they walked out of AP testing and were like, Miss Bland, that was so much easier than the lab activities that you created for us. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, that's what you want to hear. You want to hear that walking as a kid that's non-Spanish speaker taking a Spanish AP test and saying to you, the activities that you created in the language lab were much more grueling than what we just took as the AP exam. I said, okay, you're getting a 5. And a lot of them did. So
yeah, they were over prepared, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because I think especially with us being a monolingual society here, that's not the case worldwide, and they are doing something different. But now in the current circumstances where we are with digital learning and distance learning having to kind of be front and center, especially for language learning aspects, this platform offers so many easy to create activities that we've already made from Robotel, but also easy templates to go in and fill in and make your own activities. So can you give us a quick couple favorite activity types that you liked from SmartClass Plus?
So because I'm a grammarian, I love fill in the blank. I love that because I know that I can hone in on the verbs and the tenses and the structures of the Spanish language that I knew were very difficult for the students. And I just absolutely, absolutely love that immediate feedback. Kids did too. I felt that it was so important for them to see right away, and that's what they're used to. They're used to clicking and it getting like the answer right away. So it really motivated them, and I love to actually not do it in an individual manner. I would pair up students strategically based off of capability. Sometimes it was a differentiated model where I paired, you know, high students with high students, mid with mid, lower with lower, and I gave them a tiered strata, like scaffolded. Some did quiz A, some did quiz B, some did quiz C. They didn't know why or what was the rationale, but I did it that way. And so they all felt successful. And I love to hear the banter and the utterances of the students going back and forth and arguing what was the right answer and why. Yeah. Because when I heard a kid explaining to one another what and why it was conjugated to that way and why it was the pluperfect subjunctive as opposed to just the pluperfect, I'm like, I'm golden. That's like the golden thing, because, you know, in a classroom, you could overhear conversations, but you're sort of like on a creep type. You're like creeping on those microphones and listening in on just the most beautiful academic talk that you would have normally missed out on. And I love that. That I loved. With the SC Plus Plus class, I really, really, really love the drag the word to the picture.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so ideal in language acquisition, getting a visual, and especially those early learners and trying to get them to match inanimate words to them right now with their visual meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that that was a cool thing. And finally, I was just in awe with the pronunciation factor. Pronunciation is always one of the most difficult skills for a student to acquire. And, you know, as much as I used to tell my students, oh, just mimic me, mimic what you hear, mimic what you hear. It is really amazing to watch a kid do it over and over and over and over again on that record and repeat and record function to practice pronunciation until they get that 100%. They're not happy. They at 80%, they're like, no, I want to get 100%. And I see my English language learners who are so adamant about sounding so perfect when they're speaking their English language that I feel like if we did have the access test, we were able to do the access test this year, but that's one of the hardest domains for my English language learners, especially those students who enter in the country and they're, you know, already 15, 16 years old, for them to be able to record their practice recording, listen to their recordings, and really perfect that recording. That really helps in that language domain of speaking, because that's one of the hardest parts of that access assessment. And I felt like it gave the students such confidence going into the access test that their accents weren't going to be so hindering on their final results, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I really like that function too. I think that that's really neat, because in the past, it was just a teacher-student where you're listening to each student. The student has to talk in front of the whole entire class. A lot of times they'll mumble. They don't want to hear anybody. They don't want anybody to make fun of them, or they don't want to sound silly. That takes that all away. That allows a student to be in their own little world. And although it's not the most organic way of acquiring a language, it is the best way of practicing pronunciation and knowing that they're going to get immediate feedback right then and there, and they're not saying things wrong and then just moving on. If they were mispronouncing things, they see it. They're like, oh, I only got 70% on that. And they try it over and over again until they get 100%. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like that never happens. That never happens.
Well, it couldn't happen in a regular, you know, classroom. The immediate feedback, I agree 100% with you, because even if I want to tell a student, oh, pronounce it this way, or I mean, they only get a certain amount of times to raise their hand in a class. So if you have to really pick and choose when you help them, or when you articulate something differently, or, you know, even pinpoint something. Like, you're not saying they were wrong, you're just helping them, giving them feedback. And some kids took that as, I was wrong, I'm never going to speak again, right?
Exactly. And it's one of those things where I defaulted to, a kid would say something and I would just repeat what they said. And hopefully by that practice, they would hear is, why is she always repeating every answer? That I'm just repeating as a model. And I adopted that in my classroom. And it was a subconscious type pronunciation correction, indirect correction type thing. And, you know, it definitely has its purpose, but nothing like what Plus can do for students and their pronunciation.
And I agree. I mean, there's a time and a place when a student needs to get up and speak in front of people, because let's be honest, that's part of it. They have to learn to be uncomfortable and not, you know, having the perfect pronunciation or misconjugating a verb. Like, it is part of it. But if they can practice the way that they can practice the active part of the language here, I mean, they are leaps and bounds ahead. And I saw the exact same thing in my classroom, and, you know, I'm so proud to be an advocate for this platform, because it was life-changing for me as a teacher, completely flipped my classroom. And then my students who actually got to go through with this, I mean, they were leaps and bounds ahead of any class that I had taught before. So that's really all the questions I had for you today. So I appreciate, you know, in the comfort of your home, you being able to do this with, I know, kids hiding in the basement as you're.
They're locked away in the downstairs. Probably every time I go down there, I'm like, I don't want to clean this up.
It's an interesting reality that we're living in right now. But you know, to have something like this where teachers can continue teaching in general, but I think being able to continue language learning it's difficult.
It's not like Flipgrid or Seesaw or Class Dojo or the Google Classroom. Yeah, those are all great in a Google form. That's wonderful. But nothing, Screencastify, nothing complements second language acquisition like the unique program that Robotel has developed. And I will say it through and through. And I'm the biggest proponent. Like, I just know what it did for my teaching. I watched my students just completely grow, them be competitive, them want to get things perfected, them picking out my mistakes. If they're like, Miss Bland, your answer is wrong. I'm like, what? You know, and that always was like, I'm like, that's awesome. Now you get extra points. I'm like, I'm not perfect. I told you. But like, you know, if you see a mistake,
Yep.
it was just, it just changed and really made an evolution in my instruction that was just so coming of age type as technology started to be implemented and students were more and more used to using technology in my teaching career. It was just the perfect complement as I moved along with the times with the students, whether they liked it or not. They're like, oh, we're going to language lab again, because they knew it was assessment. It was assessment the entire time. And the activities were counted always in my grade book, and they knew it. They knew it. So it was like there was no getting around it. And that's how I knew that there was like a forced learning in the most authentic sense, but complementing their technological needs, but not knowing that they weren't cognizant of the fact of their language acquisition skills being acquired at the same time. So it was a real cool trick for them, you know, for me.
Yeah.
So
Well, and then of course you have the students who absolutely love it, you know, and I think
they loved it once they were there because they knew they were learning, but they were fearful because they knew that they were going to be put to the test. And then once they got into the activity, you would hear them arguing and like, no, that's not what she said. It has to be this way because do you see the gender that's right before that? And I'm like, they really do listen to me in my classroom because it was always a lot of front loading before I went there. It was always like, there was always like a culminating activity to do in the language lab for me. Sometimes I used it as a platform to spring into something, but I really liked it as a complement, as an assessment, as a formative assessment to really culminate everything that we've been learning because you could do so much there. So,
well, and no student could hide, you know, and like, so I think that was the scary part for some of those quieter students or more low achieving students or ones that weren't as confident with the language. But that was the beautiful thing about it is I also differentiated and tiered my instruction. And so I'd have this advanced folder that I would assign and I'd be like, my advanced students, you know who you are, you have to get these 2 activities done. And then the rest of yours are in the advanced. Well, by, you know, a few weeks into it, some of my kids are like, well, I'm done. Can I try some of the advanced ones? By the end of it, 80% of my class was doing the advanced ones instead. 100%. So it just,
I would see the bottom tier sort of dissipate. And I would only have like 2 groups. I would have an advanced and then like mid-high. And then I would see like the medium-high students move to the advanced and there would only be a little stragglers in the middle group. And you could see over time that you wouldn't even have to create those lower tiered activities at all because they had already acquired like the rhythm and the vibe and just the momentum of going there. It's a really cool software. I don't know what my instruction would have been without it. I really don't.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your, you know, your love of what we're doing. And we appreciate you on the same end because we see what you're doing obviously with your teachers and then, you know, having this beautiful story. So thanks for sharing with us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lindsay.
All right.